Now, I'd like to launch straight into our first session and look at blockchain and distributed ledger technologies. The technology that transmits data in a way that is secure, traceable, and permanent. Now, in 2016, financial and technology firms invested a reported $1.4 billion in blockchain. It's a global industry, and it's expected to be worth around $20 billion in 2024. And indeed, there are quite a few people that you speak to who think that that figure is largely underestimated. So today, we're going to look at how blockchain is transforming capital markets. And to open the session and to explain just what blockchain can do for capital markets, because sometimes it's easier to get some concrete examples on this, we've got one of the industry's leading figures. I'm delighted he's here today. He's spearheading the Settle initiative as CEO, and previously he was the founder of Chi-X, which I know many of you will know, Chi-X Europe, building it into one of the top 5 trading venues in Europe. I'm delighted to have him here to talk to us today. Please welcome to the stage, Peter Randall.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us here. I want you to start off by talking to us a little bit about Settle and what it is and the work that you do. I think a lot of people will be fairly familiar with what you've done before. So I'd also like you to say a few words about how those two interact.
Andrea, thank you. And thank you to everybody, and particularly thank you to Deloitte for putting on this great event with Innovate Finance. So I think the place to start is we're a startup. You know, we started in earnest the middle part of last year. That's only part of the story, though. The main part of the story is that we're a startup that has a really deep understanding of history, a deep understanding of the domain, and a deep understanding of what it is that causes change in financial markets. And I think if you really are sort of able to put that into some sort of perspective, you'd say every decade or so, something comes along in financial services that changes the financial technology landscape every 10 years or so. So in the 70s, it was SWIFT. Yeah? SWIFT was revolutionary once. In the 80s, it was the dematerialization of stocks and bonds. That was the big, big thing. In the 1990s, it was RTGS systems at central banks. Year 2000, 2010, that was the age when super fast 21st century technology came to trading systems. If you'd have said back in the day, May 2000, to a small company in Atlanta, Georgia, guess what? Guess what? By 150 months' time, you'll own the New York Stock Exchange. I guess Jeff Sprecher at ICE would have probably shrugged his shoulders and said yes. If you'd have said exactly the same thing to the New York Stock Exchange, they'd have said, well, you know, we've got a nice pair of concrete boots and you can go swimming in the East River. No, the fact of the matter is that today's change, if you will, is the transmission of 21st century technology to the post-trade space. So we've seen it happen in the trading space. That was last decade. This decade is sorting out the huge mess, the COBOL, mainframe, enormous expense that exists out there. And that's what Settle's designed to do, to make it simple, to do effectively to clearing and settlement, to do to finance and payments. Andrea, kind of like what a shipping container does to trade.
Go on,
really
explain
simple.
this shipping container analysis.
Well, shipping container is like, does the crane in Hong Kong care what's in the box? No. It picks the box up, puts it on the ship. Ship drives to wherever it's got to go. The box gets picked up and moved. That replaced the dockers, the longshoremen, the people that used to spend an enormous amount of time unloading a ship. Stuff used to get stolen, it used to get lost, it used to get damaged. That sort of whole frictional cost in trade has now disappeared. And exactly the same thing happens in payments. Exactly the same thing happens in post-trade. That there are many different systems, some of which are able to talk to each other, many which aren't. But the moment you start to think about a simple standardization, which is something that the blockchain is ideally suited to do, the moment you think about that, all of a sudden the opportunities kind of explode. And I suspect that, sure, settle will be first and settle will be fastest. But the amount of innovation that will come off the back of this is just going to be, beyond our wildest imaginings.
So how does settle make this post-trade world easier, quicker, cheaper? How does it do it?
Well, it does it in a very simple way. It does it, it's sort of like an easy way of thinking about it, but there's no substitute for hard work, and there's no substitute in hard work for hard thinking. So when we sat down to sort of do the original sort of plans for Settle, we said, well, what's it got to do? What has this chain, what has this service, what has this sort of activity got to do? Very quickly, it came up, it's got to do 5 things. It must achieve 5 things. It's got to operate at real-world speed. I mean, that means tens of thousands of transactions a second, not the 30 transactions that Ethereum can do. It's got to be able to operate at real-world capacity. That means billions of transactions a day, not the, whatever it is, couple of hundred that IBM Hyperledger can do. It's got to be able to move real-world assets, not the sort of thing that Ripple can do. It's got to be able to actually deal with privacy. It's got to be able to deal with cybersecurity. And it's got to be able to deal with KYC and AML. Those are really simple things. But the 5th thing it's got to deal with, it's got to be able to talk to other chains. It's got to solve the so-called cross-chain problem. Why for? Well, I guess there are many people in this room. There is probably just as many mobile phone contracts. But anybody in this room can speak to anybody else on their mobile phone if they've got the number. And that's because there's a cross-connect between those networks. There isn't just one great big network that GCHQ and the NSA have the telephone numbers for. There are many, many networks. The point is they can speak to each other. And that's the same thing. There are many, many shipping containers. The point is that they're standard and they can be moved. So we say it's really straightforward. Do the thinking, do the 5 tests. If you meet those, you'll win.
Tell me about this idea of disintermediation, because it makes things a lot simpler, but you're also cutting out some very big players.
Yes, absolutely. Well, disintermediation, I think, is actually the name of the game. So if you think about businesses that have gone through the digital experience, you think about the music industry, you think about supermarket industry, you think about many, many different sorts of industries. The people that appear to do best in all of this are actually the people that are nearest to the customers. It's the people that go the final mile that do very well. It's the people that provide services to the people that provide services, guess what, who get disintermediated. Why for? Because there's no need any longer for those people to be in the system. Now, they bitch and moan and kick and scream and generally caterwaul about it, but the fact of the matter is that cutting those people out cuts out, A, an enormous amount of cost, B, an enormous amount of complexity, and C, effectively in most aspects of commerce, by reducing the frictional costs of business, guess what happens to volumes? They go up. And that's the sort of thing that we're looking at the moment. So, for example, if you look at some of the major credit card companies, they, for example, for some merchants, can charge up to 5, 6, 7%. And the guy doesn't get his money for, 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I mean, that's nuts. In a WhatsApp world, the fact that some of these credit card companies can continue to exist and charge what they do kind of looks a bit odd. It looks a bit strange. But there are many, many different examples. I'm not just going to go on the credit cards. I mean, you could think about some of other financial messaging standards. These are sort of, great technology for the 1970s and 1980s, but would you do it again? And the answer is no. So disintermediation, disruption, the other side of disruption, of course, Andrea, is innovation, can come along and put in place what is needed. But it needs people who've done it before. It needs people who've got, a degree of credibility and in fact, a degree of experience as to the sorts of tricks that the incumbents throw up, because they all throw up tricks. It's a bad thing that they do, but you've got to be able to deal with it.
Well, you've been going for about 18 months now, I think, Settle.
Yeah.
What have the incumbents said to you? I mean, you obviously, these are potentially your clients.
Oh,
How do you deal with
well,
this?
some of them are. Yeah, no, it's very interesting. So the first thing that incumbents do, there's a sort of trajectory, if you will, for incumbents. The first thing they do is say, oh, it's really interesting, yes, we're doing it, which usually means that they've heard of it. And then they say, it's really, really interesting, guess what, we've set up a laboratory. And they all set up labs. Laboratories usually tend to have people in them that don't understand anything about finance, understand nothing about payments, very, very little about technology in general, but spend a fair amount of time talking about it. It doesn't work, and the banks and the institutions and the incumbents close them down. And then they all get together and say, well, all right, that didn't work, but maybe that was just because we picked the wrong people. So we'll now all join together into a consortium and we'll try and do it again in a consortium. And of course, consortiums have exactly the same problem as the original opportunity. So what incumbents do is then they first of all say, we're doing it. And then they say, oh, it's all right because we've joined a consortium. And then the consortium are going to do it. And of course, nothing happens. And then they go along to the authorities and say, this is too important to be left to the market. We should be given the mandate for it. And you see that, you've seen it already with DTCC, you've seen it with Crest, you've seen it with a number of other people. Swift have said the same thing. You know, these are institutions that are great for innovation. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. But I would say very, very clearly, very simply, that the incumbent reaction is, first of all, we're doing it, then to deny it, and thirdly, to admit that they haven't got it right and they've seen their market, sugar off to somebody else. It happens all the time. It happened with the LSE, it happened with Deutsche Börse, it happened with Euronext, etc., etc.
So how does a young company like yours, so albeit with mature and experienced people running it, break through that and actually get the clients that you want?
Well, I think it's a number of things. I mean, obviously, you want to put some of it down to skill and charm and good looks and all the rest of it, but that's very small. No, there are a number of things. I mean, clearly the most important driver of all of this is need, is the financial need that some of these companies have. So I'm, for example, working with a major banking group here that has has a system to sort of scrape deposits out of 5 subsystems in its bank. It costs that bank £25 million a year to run that system. I can do it for a fraction of that price. Super secure, easily attainable, easily installed. So it's £25 million against, let's say, a tenth of that. It's a no-brainer. All of a sudden, they've made £23 million out of their system. So there are lots of people out there that are running these incumbent legacy systems who are saying, you mean we could do it like this? You say, yep, we could do it like that. That's the second big driver. It's just better. It's just lower cost. It's cheaper, it's faster, and it's smarter. But you know what the third thing is? Most important thing? Luck. You just got to have some luck. You make your own, but you got to have some.
And do you see Settle as competing with a lot of other similar type of products in the industry at the moment?
No, not really, because I see Settle as being in a very different sort of space to some of the others. I mean, lots of people are talking about it, but it's kind of like an example of people who are talking about things that they don't really get very much traction with. The reason they don't get traction is because they don't have all those other issues that we brought up, the sort of experience issue, having a code base that actually works, having partners that have done it before, and having a sort of reputation, I suppose, for creating innovative change.
Having done it once before with Chi-X, how comfortable and confident are you that you're going to do this again? Where do you see Settle in 5 years' time?
Where do I see Settle in 5 years' time? It could be bigger than Google.
Okay, well, Peter, you heard it here first.
We'll be
watching. We'll all be watching. Peter, Randall, thank you very much indeed for coming in to talk to us about it. Thank you.